Assalamualaikum and a very good day to all. Today we are going to continue our previous lecture on demand analysis. Previously we have already looked at what demand actually is, the law related to it, and also the factors that influencing it. We were also looking at the demand function and learn how we can derive different functions using the basic demand function. The last section that we covered in the last lecture was on the difference between individual demand and market demand, and also how we can determine market equilibrium, price and quantity. Now today what we plan to do is we're going to look at elasticities of demand. Now what happened in this particular section, we would like to see how sensitive is demand when factors influencing it changes. So we understand that in the previous lecture there are so many factors that influence demand. So these factors ranging from price of the product itself, price of competitors' product, income level, advertising, and so many other factors. Now, so even though we know that all these factors affecting demand, but we would like to know what are the magnitude of change in quantity demanded when each of these factors changes. So this brings us to the topic of elasticities of demand. Now, under elasticities of demand, we are going to focus on 4 different types of elasticities of demand, specifically price elasticity of demand, income elasticity of demand, we have cross elasticity of demand, and the final one is advertising elasticity of demand. So we're going to look at each type of elasticities of demand, and towards the end of the lecture we're going to try a few questions that will test your understanding on today's lecture. So let us proceed to the topic. So this is on elasticities of demand. So as I mentioned to you just now, elasticity means responsiveness, or it is also referred to the measurement of the percentage change in one variable that results from a 1% change from another variable. So when we talk about elasticity, it helps us to measure how sensitive is quantity demanded when the determinants or the factors that influencing it changes. Now there are 2 ways of measuring elasticity. Now if you are interested to measure elasticity over 2 points or over a range of output, then you need to use arc elasticity formula. But if you want to measure elasticity over a very small range of output, then you're going to use point elasticity formula. The first type of elasticity of demand that we're going to cover would be on price elasticity of demand. Now remember that there is always a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded, meaning that when price increase, quantity demanded will decrease, or when price decrease, quantity demanded will increase. Now if let's assume that price increase, so we should expect that quantity demanded will fall. But the question is, what is the magnitude of change of quantity demanded? In other words, how much will quantity demanded fall? Is it by a small amount? Is it by a large amount? So if we are interested to identify the quantity, the change in quantity demanded as a result of a change in price, then we need to analyze price elasticity of demand. So specifically, price elasticity of demand measures the responsiveness or the sensitiveness of quantity demanded when the price of the product itself changes. So when we calculate price elasticity of demand, you're going to see that it is very helpful when it comes to price decision making. So by definition, price elasticity of demand will measure the percentage change in quantity demanded when its price changed by 1%. Okay. As I pointed to you earlier, there are two ways of calculating it. You can use the point elasticity formula or the arc elasticity formula. So if you want to calculate elasticity at one point only, then you need to use the point elasticity formula. Now the point elasticity formula simply states that you need to differentiate your Q function with respect to P here. Okay, and then you have to multiply it by P and then divide it by Q. Now, if you want to calculate elasticity between 2 points, then you need to use the arc elasticity formula. So you can see that the arc elasticity formula will find elasticity over 2 points, or the average elasticity over 2 points. Now, when you calculate elasticity of demand, you're going to get a number which is always negative. So the negative sign signifies that there is always a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. So whenever you want to interpret the coefficient that you get, okay, we will always ignore the negative sign, or in other words, we're going to focus on the absolute value. So if the absolute value of your coefficient is greater than 1, then demand is said to be elastic or very sensitive to price change. When the absolute value of your coefficient is less than 1, then demand is said to be inelastic or less sensitive to changes in price. When your price elasticity coefficient is equals to 1, then demand is said to be unitary elastic. Unitary elastic means the percentage change in price and quantity demanded is the same. Okay, so for example, if price increased by 10%, then quantity demanded will fall by 10%. So this is what we call as unitary elastic. Now, when the absolute value of your coefficient is equals to 0, then demand is said to be perfectly inelastic. Okay, perfectly inelastic means your demand is not sensitive at all. It doesn't matter how much your price changes, but the demand remains the same. Okay, and the last one, when the coefficient is equals to infinity, okay, then demand is said to have perfectly elastic demand. Okay, so perfectly elastic demand means demand is too sensitive towards price. Okay, so demand only exists at one price. At other price level, demand doesn't exist. Okay, now in this course, we're going to use the point elasticity formula instead of the arc elasticity formula. So bear in mind that it's very important for you to know, okay, what is the formula to calculate price elasticity of demand. All right, so we're going to try one example, okay, to illustrate, okay, how to use the point elasticity formula in calculating price elasticity. Now, when you want to calculate price elasticity of demand using the point elasticity formula, okay, you need to have your demand function. Okay, can you still recall what is a demand function? So a demand function is an equation which shows the relationship with quantity demanded, okay, between quantity demanded for a product and all the other factors that influence demand. So this is an example of a demand function, because as you can see, okay, we have quantity demanded on the left hand side of the equation, and all the other factors that influencing demand, okay, are placed on the right hand side of the equation. So you also need to have the values for each of your independent variable. So in this case, you are given price of X equals to 2. Y, which is income level, is given as 4. T, which is days, okay, is given as 1. And price of good Y is equals to 3. Now, when you want to calculate price elasticity of demand using the point elasticity formula, remember okay, you need to differentiate your demand function with respect to its price. And then you have to multiply price, you need to, and then you need to multiply by price and then divide it by quantity. So if you look at the first term here, okay, you are required to differentiate your demand function. So if this is your demand function, so you want to differentiate it with respect to Px, okay, so remember you need to use the partial derivative formula. Okay, so partial derivative formula, okay, requires you to differentiate with respect to price of x and assume that the other variables as a constant. So when you find dq dpx, you're gonna get -2. Okay, now as for px is already given, it is equals to 2. So that's why we have 2 here. And in terms of qx, as you can see, okay, it is not given, but since you have the demand function and the values for each of your independent variable, so definitely you can find the value of qx simply by substituting all these values into the equation. So what you need to do is you need to substitute all this value into the demand function, and you're going to end up getting q equals to 11. So this q here is equals to 11. So plug all this value into your calculator and you're going to get -4/11. So your coefficient for price elasticity of demand will always be a negative value. But when you want to interpret it, we're going to ignore the negative sign. Okay, so 4/11 is a value which is less than 1. So if it's less than 1, remember, okay, then demand is said to be inelastic. So what does inelastic means? Inelastic means less sensitive. All right, so that's how we use the point elasticity formula. So don't worry, okay, so towards the end of the lecture, we're gonna look at some sample of questions, okay, that requires you to use, okay, the point elasticity formula. Okay, the next topic that we're going to look at would be elasticity along a linear demand curve. Okay, now your demand curve is a downward sloping curve. Okay, so this is your demand curve. Now, even though you have a straight line demand curve, but this demand curve can be divided into 3 different types of elasticity. Okay, now notice that when output increases from 0 up till the midpoint here, notice that total revenue increases. Okay, so over this range of outputs, demand is said to be elastic. Okay, but when output continue to increase further, you can see that total revenue starts to decrease, and this is due to the fact that demand is inelastic. So the midpoint here, this is where the point whereby demand is unitary elastic. Okay, okay, now, okay, we want to know, okay, what's the reason for calculating price elasticity of demand. Now, as I highlight to you earlier, the main reason why we calculate price elasticity of demand is to help us with pricing policy. Okay, but okay, what we need to do is we need to tie, okay, the price elasticity concept with the total revenue concept. Okay, so total revenue is simply price multiplied by quantity. It's your sales volume. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to find out, okay, given the degree of elasticity, what would be the best pricing strategy that a firm needs to implement. Okay, what we're going to do first of all, we're going to look at the case of elastic demand. Okay, so assuming that your customers have an elastic demand, meaning that they are very sensitive towards change in price. Okay, so what I have here, okay, is the formula to calculate total revenue. Okay, so total revenue is price times quantity. Now let's assume that this firm, okay, plans to increase price. So you should expect that quantity demanded will fall because that's the law of demand, correct? Now, but the question is, but the thing is, your customers, okay, have been found to be having elastic demand. That means they are very sensitive towards change in price. So when you increase price only by a small amount, the effect on quantity demanded is that it will fall by a larger amount. Okay, for example, let's say you increase price by 1%, quantity demanded will fall by more than 1%, let's say 10%. Okay, so what would be the effect on total revenue? So as you can see, the losses from reduction in demand would overcome the gain that you get by increasing price. So eventually what happened? Total revenue will fall. Okay, but on the other hand, if you decide to introduce price discount, okay, so you should expect quantity demand will increase more than the percentage decrease in price. Meaning that if, let's say, price decreased by 10%, quantity demanded will increase by 30%. So why this happen? Because your customers are very sensitive. So even though you decrease price by a very small amount, but the effect on quantity demanded will be huge. Okay, so eventually what happened? Total revenue will increase. So if you know that your customers are very sensitive towards change in price, always give them price discount. Okay, that will actually boost your sales. Okay, now let us proceed to the case of demand being inelastic. Okay, now let's assume that, okay, you have identified that your customers are not sensitive to price change. So what would be the best option in terms of pricing policy? Should you increase price or should you reduce price? Okay, so let's look at each cases, okay, one at a time. Now, if you increase price, let's say by 10%, okay, the quantity demanded will fall by 1%, for example. Okay, so why is it that the percentage change in quantity demanded is less than the percentage change in price? Because your customers are not that sensitive. So you increase price by a large amount, but because your customers are not that sensitive, the effect on quantity demanded, you can see here, is very small. So if you want to know what would be the total effect on total revenue will gain. But on the other hand, if you decide to introduce price discount, the effect on quantity demanded would not be that much. Okay, quantity demanded will increase by only a small amount. So if you want to know what would be the effect on total revenue will fall. Well, okay, so looking at this, okay, exercises, you can see that knowing your customers being not sensitive or less sensitive towards change in price, it will be helpful for the firm to charge them higher price, because the customers simply don't care. They will simply buy the product. Okay, so eventually, okay, the firm will gain. All right. Now let's look at the last case whereby demand is unitary elastic. Okay, what is unitary elastic demand? This is the case whereby the percentage change in price is the same thing as the percentage change in quantity. So if, let's say, price increased by 10%, quantity demanded will also fall by 10%, and there will be no effect on total revenue. The same goes if you introduce a 10% price discount, quantity demanded will increase by 10%. So again, there will be no effect on total revenue. So if you have found out that your demand has a unitary elastic demand, then don't bother to introduce a price discount or increase price, because it simply won't affect your sales. Okay, so based on these guidelines, you can see that if company is able to identify the degree of price elasticities of demand for their customers, this will enable them to identify the pricing strategy. Okay, so the case whereby your customers are sensitive towards price, always introduce them with price discount. Okay, that will give you more sales. Okay, but if your customers are less sensitive towards change in price, then do not give price discount. You can charge them premium price because your customers will still continue buying your product. Okay, but for the case of unitary elastic demand, okay, either price discount or price increase wouldn't affect your sales. Okay, now the last thing that we're going to look at under price elasticity of demand would be what are the factors that influence price elasticity of demand. Okay, so here we are interested to know why, okay, in certain cases your customers are very sensitive towards changing price, but in another cases, okay, there are customers who are not sensitive towards changing price. Okay, so we have several factors here that actually, okay, influence the degree of elasticity. And the first one would be in terms of availability of substitute. Okay, so the thing is, if there are many substitute for a product in the market, you're going to see that demand tend to be very elastic. Okay, so take for an example, detergent. Okay, let's say, okay, you are using detergent of brand X, okay, and in the market there are so many other brands of detergent ranging from brand A up till brand K. Okay, now if let's say, okay, after some times using detergent X, okay, now the price of detergent X suddenly increase. Okay, now because there are a lot of other detergents in the market, okay, you wouldn't having any problems in substituting detergent X with other types of detergent. So this case will basically show that when you have a lot of substitute in the market, so customers will quickly, change the expensive product with the cheaper product. So demand is said to be very elastic when there are many substitute. But if you take the case of petrol, okay, remember that few years back, okay, we always face with a condition of the fact that price of petrol increased. Okay, but the thing is, even though price of petrol increased, but people still buy it. Why? Because there are not much substitute of petrol. So even though price of petrol increase, but you still need to drive your car to work. You still need to send your children to school, for example. So you still need to buy petrol just to make sure that your car can move from one place to another. So even though the price of petrol increase, but you still continue buying petrol and it wouldn't affect that much. So the case whereby there are less substitute, demand seems to be less sensitive or inelastic. Okay. Now, the second factor would be in terms of proportion of income spent on a product. So we would like to see whether or not, okay, your spending on that particular product consume a lot of your income. Okay, I give you a good example. Okay, let's look at salt. Okay, now let's assume that you are using 1 packet of salt a month. Now, how much will it cost you? Okay, for example, it will cost you about 80 cents per packet. Okay, and that will consume how much of your income? Okay, assuming that you receive an income of 3,000 a month. So every month you're gonna spend 80 cents of your income on salt. Okay, and suddenly let's say price of salt increased to $1. Would you concern about the price increase? I bet you wouldn't concern that much, isn't it? Because $1 of your 3,000 income wouldn't affect that much. So since you are using only a small portion of income to spend on salt, so your demand, okay, for salt tend to be inelastic. Okay. The third one would be time period. Okay, so here, okay, we need to distinguish between short time period and long time period. Okay, so if you take into consideration the change in price, so okay, the degree of elasticity would differ between short run and long run. Okay, we're going to use the same example of petrol. Okay, now, so let's assume that the price of petrol increase. Now, over a short period of time, okay, you can see that people still consume the same amount of petrol. Now why? Because they don't have enough time to find other substitute. Okay, but over a longer period of time, you can see that there are possibilities that the demand for petrol will fall. Why? Because in a longer time period, consumers are able to find other substitute. Okay, so over a long period of time, consumers are able to find, other ways, okay, of commuting to work, for example. So maybe what they want to do is they want to carpool with their office mate, or they just want to use the public transportation because over a long period of time the public transportation system has improved, or simply they just buy a hybrid car which is more fuel efficient. So over a short period of time, demand tend to be inelastic, less sensitive, okay, but over a long period of time, because customers have more time to adapt to the changes in price, then demand is said to be more elastic. Okay, now the last factor here that I would like to highlight would be the types of good. Okay, the type of good would also affect the degree of elasticity. So if the product is a necessity, meaning that you need to consume it in order to survive, then even though the price of the necessity product changes, it wouldn't affect that much, okay, on your quantity demanded. But if the product tend to be a luxury product, okay, so you know that it is kind of expensive, okay, but it is not essential for you to survive. You can still live even though you don't have luxury product. So assuming that price of luxury product increases, quantity demanded for luxury product will fall by a larger amount. Okay, so if the product is a necessity, then demand tend to be inelastic, but if it is a luxury, then demand tends to be elastic. Okay, so we have looked at the first type of elasticity of demand, which is price elasticity. Okay, now the second type of elasticity of demand is income elasticity of demand. So here what we would like to do is we would like to know how sensitive is demand when income level changes. Okay, so as you know that income is one factor that influences demand. So under income elasticity of demand, you would like to know how sensitive is demand when income changes. Okay, so to calculate income elasticity of demand, okay, again there are two types of formula. You can use the point elasticity formula or the arc elasticity formula. But again, in this module, we're going to concentrate on point elasticity formula. Now, looking at this formula, you can see that, okay, what you need to do first of all is you need to differentiate your Q function with respect to Y, and then you have to multiply it by Y divided by Q. Okay. Now, when you calculate your income elasticity of demand, you may get either a positive value or a negative value. So if the value is negative, then the product is said to be an inferior good. Okay, what is an inferior good? An inferior goods are goods that of low quality. You're going to use inferior good when you don't have much income. Okay, so when your income is low, you're going to consume more of inferior good. But as your income increases, you don't want to use low quality product. You want to substitute it with a better quality product. So a good example of inferior good would be broken rice. Okay, so when you don't have much money, so you're going to buy broken rice, which is much cheaper. But as your income increases, you would like to buy a better quality rice. Okay, now if your coefficient for income elasticity of demand shows a positive number, then the product is said to be a normal good. Okay, a normal good is a good which have a positive relationship with regards to income level. Okay, now your normal good can further be divided into luxury or a necessity. Okay, so if your coefficient has a positive value and that value is greater than 1, then the product can be categorized as luxury product. Okay, but if the coefficient is from 0 to positive 1, then the product can be categorized as a necessity. Okay, so when you calculate your income elasticity of demand, you are able to categorize your product into either inferior or normal good, and this normal good can be further categorized into luxury or necessity goods. Okay, now why is it important for you to categorize, okay, your product? Well, it will help you to do two things. Okay, number one, it will help you to forecast about future demand. Okay, so if let's say you have identified that, okay, your product is a luxury product, and you can see that the demand for your product starts to build up. So this is an indication that the economy is growing. Okay, so there is a potential for your business to expand. Okay, so you may want to invest, okay, in your business because the economy is growing and income level is going to increase. Okay, that's one possible way of using the information of income elasticity. Now, the second, okay, use of income elasticity is that it can help you with, planning your promotional strategies. So if let's say, okay, you have identified that your product is said to be a necessity product. Okay, that means you don't need to have, very intensive marketing strategies because, when it comes to necessity product, people will more or less consume the same quantity. But if your product has been proven to be a luxury product, then you would like to spend a lot in terms of promotional strategies. Okay, so when you want to determine on the type of medium, okay, that you want to use to advertise your product, so maybe you would like to advertise it in, for example, magazine that can attract the middle income group or the higher income group. Okay, so by identifying the type of product, then you'll be able to determine the appropriate promotional strategies. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to show you an example in terms of how we calculate income elasticity of demand. We're going to use the same example as we did in the price elasticity of demand. We still have Qx equals to 1 minus 2px plus 2y plus 3t plus py. Okay, we still have the same amount of px, which is 2, y is 4, t equals to 1 and py equals to 3. Okay, now if you substitute all this current value into your qx function, you're going to find that your qx is equals to 11. Okay, so now what we would like to do is we are going to calculate our income elasticity of demand. Now, so the formula would be dq. Okay, you need to differentiate your q function with respect to y. So even though you have a multivariate function, so when you differentiate your function with respect to y, all the other variables you have to assume it as constant. So when you do that, you're going to get 2 as the product. Okay, and then you need to multiply by the value of y, which is given as 4, and then divided it by the value of qx, which earlier you have determined to be equal to 11. Okay, so if you simplify this, you're going to get a value of 8 over 11, which is a positive value. Okay, meaning that good X is a normal good, but this normal good can be further categorized into a necessity product because the coefficient is between 0 and 1. Okay, so that's how you calculate income elasticity of demand. Okay, now let us move on to the third type of elasticity, that would be cross price elasticity of demand. Now, when you are interested to know how sensitive is demand for your product when price of another product changes, then we need to calculate what we call as cross price elasticity of demand. So cross price elasticity of demand will measure the percentage change in quantity demanded for your product when price of another product changes by 1%. Okay, now again we have two formulas. You can use the point elasticity formula or the arc elasticity formula, but as I mentioned to you much earlier, the point elasticity formula would be the one that we are going to concentrate. So if you look at this point elasticity formula, you are required to differentiate, okay, your demand function with respect to price of good Y, multiply the price of good Y, and then divided it by quantity of good X. Alright. Now, when you calculate your cross price elasticity of demand, you can get a positive value, okay, a negative value, or simply a value equals to 0. Okay. So if the value is greater than 0, or if the value is positive, then product X and Y are said to be substitute. Substitute means the X and Y can be used in place of one another. If you don't have X, consumers can use Y. If there is no product Y, then consumers can use product X. Okay. Now, if the coefficient shows a negative value, then the two products are said to be complements, meaning that the two products are used together. Okay, just like pen and ink. All right. And if the coefficient is equals to 0, then there would be no relationship between X and Y. Now, let's try one exercise, okay? How are we going to calculate cross elasticity? Again, we are looking at the same example, okay? So, we know that the cross price elasticity of demand requires you to differentiate your demand function for good X with respect to price of good Y. When you do that, you have to assume the other variable as constant. Okay, so this will give you a coefficient 1. Okay, now and then you have to multiply it by the value of PY, which is 3, and then divide it by the value of QX, which is 11. Okay, so when you plug this into the calculator, you're going to get a value of 3 over 11. Now 3 over 11 is a positive value. Okay, so you can say that product X and Y are substitute product, but because the product is very close to 0, so you can say that the product, have a very weak substitute. Okay, so it almost have no relationship at all. All right. Okay. Now, the last type of elasticity that we're going to look at would be advertising elasticity. Now, advertising elasticity allows us to identify how sensitive is demand when advertising changes. Okay, so in other words, it will help us to identify the percentage change in quantity demanded when advertising expenditure changed by 1%. Okay, so again, there are two formulas. We have the point elasticity formula and the arc elasticity formula. So we're going to concentrate on the point elasticity formula here. So as you can see, you are required to differentiate your demand function with respect to A, or advertising, multiply by the value of advertising, and then divided it by your Q value. Okay, when you calculate your advertising elasticity, you may either get a positive value or a negative value. A positive value simply indicates that there is a direct relationship between advertising expenditure and quantity. But then if you get a negative coefficient, it means that there is a negative relationship between advertising expenditure and quantity. So if you get a negative coefficient, then this means that as you increase advertising expenditure, the quantity demanded for your product tend to decrease. So this shows, or this is an indication that there is something wrong with your advertising medium. Okay, so you may want to review your advertising strategy. Okay. All right, so as I mentioned to you just now, okay, we're gonna try some exercises which can help you to understand all the 4 different types of elasticity that we have looked at just now. Okay, so remember there are 4 different types of elasticity. We have price elasticity of demand, income elasticity of demand, cross elasticity of demand, and advertising elasticity of demand. So in the first case, okay, the price elasticity of demand allows you to see how sensitive is demand towards change in price. Income elasticity of demand, okay, allows you to determine how sensitive is demand when income changes. Cross elasticity of demand, okay, looks at how sensitive is demand for one product when the price of another product changes. And the last type of elasticity is advertising elasticity of demand, which allows you to see how sensitive is demand when advertising expenditure changes. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do next is, as I said, we're going to look at one example. Okay, so I just want to test your understanding, okay, of the lecture just now. Okay, now let's say that you are given a demand function. Okay, so there is a case here. So a multiple regression analysis based on a data set that consists of 30 observations yielded the following estimated demand function for product X. Okay, so Qx equals 120 minus 1.1 px plus 0.04y plus 0.90 a. So Qx here represents quantity demanded for product X. Px is price of product X, Y is income, and A is actually your advertising expenditure. Now, assuming that the current values for all your independent variables are given as 1,000 for Px, 20,000 for income, Y, and 5,000 for A, advertising. Okay. Now, let's look at the first question. Now, the first question wants you to determine 3 types of function: the demand function, the total revenue function, and the marginal revenue function. So, in order to answer this question, okay, you need to recall the lecture on topic 2. The lecture, okay, on topic 3, but towards the first half, okay, of it. So remember that given a long function, long demand function, you can, shorten it up to demand curve function, followed by a price function, total revenue function, and marginal revenue function. So we're gonna, okay, try and derive that function. Okay, so this is your original, okay, demand function. Okay, so remember, first of all, what we want to do is we want to find the demand function. Okay, so a demand curve function only shows the relationship between Qx and Px only. So what are we going to do with all the other variables? You have to assume it as constant. You have to substitute the current values. Okay, so what we're going to do, okay, so we're going to plug in all the values, okay, except for the value of Px. So Y here is given as 20,000. A is given as 5,000. Okay, so what we need to do next is we need to simplify it. Okay, so let's simplify, okay, this equation. So when you simplify this equation, you're going to get 5420, okay, minus 1.1 px. Okay, so this is what we call as a demand curve function. It only shows the relationship between Qx and Px. Okay. All right. Now, the next thing is we need to derive to total revenue function. But before you can derive to total revenue function, we need to derive to the price function. So to derive to the price function, we need to bring price to the left hand side of the equation and quantity demanded to the right hand side of the equation. So let's switch place here. So you have 5420 minus Qx. Okay, so you need to divide both sides by 1.1. So you're going to end up getting 4927.27. Okay, sorry, so Px would equals to 4927.27 minus 0.91 Qx. Okay, this is your price function. Once you got your price function, we can proceed with determining the total revenue function. So total revenue is P times Q, and remember, we always need to replace P in the form of Q. So your P here is your P function. Okay, so that's your P, and you have to multiply it by Q. Okay, so you're going to end up getting 4927.27 Q minus 0.91 Q squared. Okay, so if you want to be a little bit more specific, okay, in terms of this Q actually represents good X, well, you can actually add in your Qx here. Okay, so no problem. So you can just have your X here or not. Okay, so that's your total revenue function. And finally, the marginal revenue function for good X would require you to differentiate, okay, your total revenue function with respect to quantity of X. Okay, so that will give you 4927.27 minus 1.82 Qx. Okay, so this would be your marginal revenue function. Okay, so this is how we derive to the different functions. So remember, if you have your demand function, to get to your demand curve function, okay, you need to only show the relationship between quantity demanded and its own price. So all the other variables, you need to substitute values. Okay, so once you have your demand curve function, okay, you need to convert it into the price function before you can derive to total revenue function. And to derive to marginal revenue function, all you need to do is you need to differentiate the total revenue function. Okay, now what we want to do next is we are going, okay, to calculate the quantity demanded for product X. In other words, we want to find what's the value of Qx. So remember just now, okay, Qx, okay, is given, okay, by this long function. So if you want to find the value of Qx, you have to substitute, okay, the current values for each of the independent variable. So your Px here is 1000 plus 0.04 multiplied by y, where your y is equals to 20,000 plus 0.90 a, where a is equals to 5,000. Okay, so if we simplify this, you're going to get Q equals to 4320. So that's the value of Q, okay, quantity demanded for product X based on the current values. Okay, let us proceed to question C. You can see that there are few sub-questions here. First of all, you need to calculate the price elasticity of demand. Okay, now, as I said, if you are given a demand function and one value for each of the independent variable, then you need to use the point elasticity formula. So to calculate the price elasticity of demand, okay, would require you to differentiate the demand function with respect to price, okay, and then multiply that by price divided by quantity. Okay, so you need to find, okay, all these values before you can proceed in terms of calculating your price elasticity of demand. Now, what would be the derivative of your Q function with respect to price? Okay, so if you differentiate Qx with respect to price of X, so you need to assume all the other variables as constant. So this will give you a coefficient equals to negative 1.1. Okay, now multiply by the value of P. Now your P value just now is given as 1000. So that would be your P value. Okay, divided by Q value, and you have calculate just now the Q value to be equals to 4320. So plug all this into your calculator and you're going to end up getting a coefficient equals to 0.25. Okay, now you can see that this value is negative, and as I pointed to you much earlier, your price elasticity of demand will always be negative. So the negative sign here indicates there is a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. So now you have calculated, okay, the price elasticity of demand. So what does this coefficient represent? Okay, so the coefficient simply tells you when price increase, okay, by 1%, quantity, okay, demanded, okay, will fall by the value of the coefficient, which is 0.25%. Now, so you can see that you increase price by 1%, quantity demanded will fall by 0.25%. So can you guess what is the degree of elasticity? It's going to be inelastic. So demand is inelastic. Okay, so if you refer back to your PowerPoint slide just now, okay, so you can see that when the absolute value of your coefficient for price elasticity of demand is less than 1, then demand is said to be inelastic. And this is also proven when we interpret the coefficient. Okay, now the second half of the question says, should the company discount its price to increase total revenue? Now remember that, okay, demand is said to be inelastic. Okay, so if you decide to introduce price discount, so how does that affect your total revenue? So you need to do this short test. Okay, so you want, okay, to introduce a price discount, meaning that you want to reduce price. Okay, now when you reduce price, okay, so we want to see what would be the effect on quantity demanded. So quantity demanded will definitely increase. Okay, so how much quantity demanded increase? Quantity demanded will increase by a small amount because demand is inelastic. So what would be the effect on total revenue? Well, total revenue will increase, but total revenue will increase by a small amount only. So if you have found out that demand tend to be inelastic, then you shouldn't then you shouldn't give a price discount, because by giving a price discount, your total revenue will fall. So it's not advisable for you to give a price discount. Now let's proceed to the next question. Now the next question wants you to calculate the income elasticity of demand. Now to calculate income elasticity of demand, you need to use the point elasticity formula. So the point elasticity formula says that you need to differentiate your demand function with respect to income, and then you need to multiply by the value of income, current income, divided by the value of quantity. Now, when you want to differentiate your Q function with respect to I, so what do you need to do? So I here refers to income. So if your income is Y, then simply use Y. If your income is I, then you can use I. So it depends on the symbol that you use. So you want to differentiate your Q function with respect to Y just now. So this is your demand function. If you differentiate with respect to Y, so all the other variables you have to assume it as constant. So that will leave you with 0.04. So dQ dy is 0.04. And then you have to multiply it by the current value of Y, which is just now given as 20,000. So we're going to type in 20,000 divided by the value of Q. So do you still need to calculate Q? Well, you don't need to recalculate Q because there wouldn't be any change. It's going to be the same as you have already calculated in B. It's going to be 4320. So when you substitute this value, so just plug in this into your calculator, and you're going to get your income elasticity to be equals to 0.185. So what does 0.185 means? It simply means if income increase by 1%, quantity demanded will increase, because it's a positive coefficient, by 0.185%. So what can be said about the characteristic of good X? Because if you look at the question, the second part wants you to find the type of good X. So you can see that the value is greater than 0. That means it's a positive value, meaning that it is a normal good. But because it is between 0 to 1, then you can say that it is a necessity. So good X is a normal and necessity good. And then the question also wants to know what is the impact on the quantity demanded for good X during recession. Now you know that your product is a necessity good, and you know that when we talk about necessity goods, that means consumer will always consume it no matter what happened. So the consumption doesn't affect that much by income level, because consumers needs to survive on this good. Alright, so even though it's a recession, but the quantity demanded, okay, for good X wouldn't be affected. So what is the impact on quantity demanded? So quantity, okay, demanded for good X is not much affected during recession, simply because the product is a necessity. Okay, well, you take into consideration rice. Okay, so if you're talking about the Asian, okay, community, so basically, okay, they eat rice every day, so it's like a necessity. So if, let's say, the price of rice increases, but people still will buy rice, isn't it? Okay. And the last one would be determining the impact on quantity demanded when advertising expenditure increased by 10%. Now, when you want to see what is the percentage change in quantity demanded, okay, when advertising expenditure changes, this would require you to calculate advertising elasticity, because by definition, advertising elasticity would measure the percentage change in quantity demanded when advertising changed by 1%. So, to answer this question, we need to calculate the advertising elasticity. Okay, so advertising elasticity would require you to differentiate your demand function with respect to advertising, and then multiply by the value of advertising divided by the value of Q. Okay, so so dQdA simply means that you need to differentiate your demand function. So let's see what we need to do. So this is your demand function. Okay, so if you want to find dQdA, this simply means that you have to differentiate the demand function with respect to A. So all the other variables, you have to assume it as constant. Okay, so that will give you a coefficient of 0.9. Okay, and then multiply by the current value of advertising, which is given as 5,000, and your Q value, there is no changes, so it is still 4320. So this will give you a coefficient of 1.04. So what does it mean? It simply means that when advertising, if advertising expenditure increase by 1%, quantity demanded for X will increase by 1.04%. Okay, but the question is interested to know the impact of a 10% increase. So if advertising expenditure increase by 10%, then quantity demanded for X will increase by 10 times the value of the coefficient, and that will give you a value of 10.4%. Okay, so that would be the impact of an increase of a 10% increase in advertising expenditure. All right, so you can see that given a demand function and the values for each of your independent variable, to calculate the elasticity of demand, you need to use the point elasticity formula. When calculating the different types of elasticity of demand, you're not only getting the coefficient, but you are able to make so many different types of decision in your company. All right, now let's try another question, but this is more of a conceptual question. So it actually tests your understanding on the use of your elasticity of demand concept. Okay. Alright, so this brings us to question 2. Yeah? So the information below shows the price elasticity of demand, cross price elasticity of demand, and income elasticity of demand for my TV cable television. Okay, so you are given here that the coefficient for price elasticity is negative 0.85. Okay, notice that it is a negative figures. Why? Well, the fact that there will always be a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded for a product. Now, AXY simply represent the cross price elasticity of demand. It is given here as 1.2, and income elasticity is 1.6. Okay, so you are required to analyze the following statement and explain your answer. Let's look at the first question. Now, it is said here that my TV cable television is a luxury good. So do you agree to this statement? Now, so when we talk about categorizing goods into either luxury or necessity, so what would be the appropriate type of elasticity of demand that we need to look for? Okay, yes, we need to look at the income elasticity of demand. Okay, so the income elasticity of demand, okay, represented by epsilon I, here the coefficient is given as 1.60. So, okay, so the income elasticity of demand is 1.60. So the value is positive and it is greater than 1. Okay, therefore, this product is a luxury product. So, because, okay, your income elasticity of demand is greater than 1, okay, then this is a luxury product. Okay, alright. Let's look at the second question. Now, what is the impact of a 15% increase in income on the demand for my TV cable television? Now, whenever you want to see the impact, okay, on quantity demanded, okay, when income changes by certain percentage, then you need to look at the measurement of income elasticity of demand. And again, your income elasticity of demand here is given as 1.60. So what does this mean? It means when income increased by 1%, okay, now quantity demanded, okay, will increase by 1.6%. Okay, but the questions wants to know the impact of increasing income by 15%. So if income were to increase by 15% instead, so quantity demanded, okay, will increase by how much? It will increase by 15 times 1.6, okay, and that would give you 24%. Okay, so when income increase by 15%, so the impact on quantity demanded is that it will increase by 24%. Okay, let us proceed to question C. It says here, reducing the price of my TV cable television will increase total revenue. Do you agree? Okay, so meaning that if my TV cable television introduce a price discount, it will increase the total revenue. So do you agree with this statement? Now, when it comes to pricing strategy and the impact on total revenue, you need to refer to price elasticity of demand. Okay, looking at the price elasticity of demand coefficient, the value is negative 0.85. Okay, so what does it tells you? Okay, will this indicate that you should increase price or reduce price? Okay, so your price elasticity of demand, okay, is given as negative 0.85. So what does it mean? It means if price increase by 1%, quantity demanded will decrease because of the negative sign by 0.85%. Okay, notice that you increase price by 1%, but quantity demanded reduced by 0.8%. So what does this indicate? It simply indicates that demand is inelastic. When demand is said to be inelastic, it means your customers are not that sensitive towards changing price. Okay, so when your customers are not sensitive towards changing price, should you reduce price? So notice that if we reduce price, okay, so what will happen? So total revenue, okay, it's P multiplied by Q. You decided to reduce price. Okay, what is the impact on quantity? Well, quantity demanded will definitely increase, but because demand is not sensitive, the increase in quantity demanded, you can see, is very small. So eventually the effect on total revenue is that total revenue will fall. Okay, total revenue will fall. So when you introduce price discount, total revenue won't increase. Okay, instead total revenue will decrease. So in these incidences, you would disagree with reducing price as a way to increase total revenue. If you want to increase total revenue, you should instead introduce an increase in price. Okay. Now, let's move on to question D. Question D says, what is the relationship between my TV cable television and its competitor? When you want to see the relationship between your product and another product, so this requires you to look at the cross elasticity of demand. Now, your cross elasticity coefficient is given as 1.2. Okay, so what does this tells you? Okay, so your cross elasticity of demand here, okay, is equals to 1.20. Okay, so that's your coefficient. So this shows that, okay, my TV cable, okay, TV and its competitor has a substitute relationship. Okay, why is that the case? Because the coefficient is positive. The positive coefficient, okay, simply means, okay, if price of my TV, okay, increase by 1%, sorry, okay, this should be if price of competitors, okay, if price of competitors product, okay, increase by 1%, quantity demanded for your product, in this case my TV, will increase by 1.2%. Okay, so competitors increase price by 1%, so the effect on your product is that it will your demand will increase by 1.2%. So this indicates that your product and your competitor's product have a substitute relationship. Okay, and the last question, okay, would be when the price of competitor decreases by 10%, okay, what is the percentage change in quantity demanded for my TV cable television? Okay, so when you want to see the impact, okay, of a decrease in price if you want to see what is the impact of a 10% reduction in price of competitor on the demand for your product, and again you need to refer to your cross price elasticity of demand. Okay, so looking at the cross price elasticity of demand just now, okay, you have already established that, okay, a 1% increase in competitors' price will cause your demand to increase by 1.2%. So if competitors reduces its price, okay, if price of competitors' product, okay, reduced by 10%, okay, then quantity demanded for your product, in this case my TV, will decrease, okay, it should be the same direction, will decrease by 1.2 times 10%, and that will give you 12%. All right, so that would be the impact of a reduction in price of competitor in the amount of 10%. Okay, so the demand for your product, okay, will fall by 12%. Why is that the case? Well, the thing is, when competitors' price reduce, okay, definitely the demand for competitors' product will increase because it's cheaper. So there is a very high possibility that the demand for your product will fall because your customers will go for the cheaper product, okay, offered by your competitors. Okay, and since your competitors are introducing exactly similar product, so consumers have no problem in using them. All right, so this is how, okay, we look at the effect of a change in competitors' price on the demand for your product. So the second exercises hopefully will help you to understand why we actually calculate the different types of elasticity of demand. Okay, if you have the time, okay, so I would like you to look at this question. Okay, so this is another question which requires you to calculate the different types of elasticity of demand using the point elasticity formula, and based on the coefficients that you have calculated, you need to think about the pricing strategy of your company. You need to think about the action of your competitors' pricing, and you also need to determine the type of product that you produce, which can actually helps you to forecast future demand, or in fact help you with the advertising or promotion. Okay, so basically what we have done today is we have looked at elasticity of demand, which allows us to understand how sensitive is demand when factors influencing it changes. So we have looked at 4 different types, okay, and all these 4 different types of elasticity will help managers to answer problems, okay, when managing the company. So in the case of price elasticity of demand, managers are able to identify how sensitive are their customers towards changes in price of the company's product. So this will help the firm in identifying the suitable pricing strategy. So always remember that if your customers are sensitive to price, then a good strategy is to introduce a price discount. But if your customers are not sensitive towards change in price, then it is allowable for you to introduce a premium price. In the case of income elasticity of demand, you are able to categorize your product into inferior or normal goods. And your normal goods can be further divided into necessity or luxury goods. Now, why is it important for you to categorize all this product? Remember that it will help you with future forecasting future demand and also on determining the advertising strategy. The third type of elasticity is the cross price elasticity of demand. So this will help you to determine the relationship between your product and competitors' product, whether it is substitute or complementary. Okay, and the last one would be advertising elasticity, is looking at the effectiveness of your advertising strategy. Okay, so I hope that by now you not only know how to use the different point elasticity formula to calculate the different types of elasticity of demand, but the most important thing, you know why we calculate each of the type of elasticity. Okay, so in the next lecture, what we're going to do is we're going to look at estimation of demand function or demand estimation. In that particular chapter, what we attempt to do is to understand or learn how we come up with this long demand function. Okay, what are the process involved in estimating this demand function? Okay, so that will be covered in our next lecture. Okay, so with that, I thank you.